Okay. All right. So, good morning to all of you guys. Nice to see you here. Welcome to everyone who's online. We're going to start with meditation like we do each morning, breathing mindfulness meditation, a little bit of loving kindness meditation. And then afterwards, I'm going to share with you guys how to guide children along the path. And as I mentioned, if you have children, of course, this will apply. If you're planning to have children, this will apply. But even if you don't have children or you're never even planning to have children, you can actually use these same teachings that I'm going to share here with other people as well. So it can help you if you're planning to guide anybody on the path to enlightenment. And then after this talk, I'm going to share the next talk, which is how to select wholesome friends and a life partner, because the choices you make about who to involve in your life is going to affect you. And you would like to choose wisely, but you would like to be able to choose without ego and without putting people down and judging others. So I'm going to help you guys to be able to see how to do this. So usually as we go further and further into the course like this, as I'm doing meditation, I kind of taper off the guidance. At the beginning of the week, I've been guiding you guys in meditation, but I'm wondering, are you guys okay at this point if I just do chanting and you guys do your own meditation? Are you guys okay with that? Yeah, you guys okay? You think you're okay? So remember, you like to do just maybe 3 minutes or so of focusing on the breath. And anytime the mind moves off the breath, cut that off and let it go and come back to the breath. And then after you've done that for about 3 minutes, then start bringing in those phrases. May I be peaceful. May I be safe. May I be well. May I be free of all discontentedness and the suffering it causes. Then kind of gradually expand your rings, where you're maybe doing a ring or two of people that you have loving kindness for, do a ring or two of people that you're more neutral about, and then do a ring or two of people that you do have anger towards. And now finish up with all beings. And then go back to your breathing mindfulness meditation for just about 3 minutes or so. And then I'm going to come out with the chanting. Okay? So you guys all feel comfortable with that? Okay, so I'll just do the chanting and then you guys do your own meditation. Okay. Arahang Sama Sambuddho Mahakewa Phutang Mahakewanang Aphiwate Ami Sawakato Mahakewata Tammo Dhammang namasami Supatipano Mahakewato Sawakasangko Sanghang namami Namo Arhasa Bhagavato Arahato Sama Sambuddhassa Namo Arhasa Bhagavato Arahato Sama Sambuddhassa Namo Arhasa Bhagavato Arahato Sama Sambuddhassa Iti piso emakewa Arahang Sama Sambuddho Vicacaranang Samuno Sekato Rokawitu Anutero Purisa Dhamma Sati Satatawa Manusanang Poto Bhagavati Arahang Sama Sambuddho Mahakawa Potang Mahakavanang Aphivateyami Savakato Mahakavata Tammo Dhammang Namasami Supatipano Mahakavato Savaka Sangho Sanghang Namami Namo Arhasa Bhagavato Arahato Sama Sambuddhassa Namo Arhasa Bhagavato Arahato Sama Sambuddhassa Namo Arhasa Bhagavato Arahato Sama Sambuddhassa Iti piso Mahakawa Arahang Sama Sambuddho Vicacarang Samuno Sekato Rokawitu Anutero Purisa Dhamma Sati Satatawa Manusrang Poto Bhagavati. Okay, if you guys would like to slowly make your way out of meditation, what I'm going to do here before I start talking about this topic of what we're planning to discuss today, I would like to just pause and see if you guys have any questions about meditation, because oftentimes people are building up their meditation practice, and I'd like to just kind of make sure there's some time for you guys to ask any and all questions that you like about meditation. So does anybody have any meditation questions you guys would like to ask, since you're probably building up your meditation practice? Yeah.
Hello? Okay. I noticed in the loving kindness, I did the ring for somebody I have a difficult, maybe, relationship with. And after the end of the loving kindness, I feel good. And then I do the breathing mindfulness. And then maybe some of the old patterns still creep in.
Mm-hmm.
And then I kind of feel it. And I'm like, oh, wait, this isn't true love. And then like the teaching started to kick in. And I know that isn't the point of breathing mindfulness, because you're supposed to let it go.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're practicing the entire Eightfold Path in breathing mindfulness, like, are you still applying right intention, which is right thought, like adjusting those thoughts?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, during the meditation itself, you're just cutting off and letting go and coming back. That's what you would like to do, is just cut off and let go, cut off and let go, cut off and let go. But after meditation, after you're done, if you're noticing that you're having certain intentions that are unwise or, unwholesome thoughts, that's your mindfulness that sees that. And then you apply right effort to cut it off and let it go. But then during the meditation, you're just cutting off and letting go, cutting off and letting go, realizing that it's challenging for the mind to do that oftentimes. And what you're experiencing is normal. you need this gradual training, gradual practice, and gradual progress. It's not, like a push button type thing, or it's not like you have a headache and you take a pill and 30 minutes later the headache's gone. This is going to be a pattern that is going to be there for a while because that's what your mind's used to. But each one of these things that you're doing, breathing mindfulness meditation, generosity, loving kindness meditation, applying right effort outside of meditation, and all these other things that you're learning, slowly but surely, all of this affects the mind, and the mind moves to this better way of life and starts to essentially be rewired. So just be patient with your mind, but just keep applying the teachings. This is where the confidence in the Buddha, the teachings, the community comes in, your teacher and your own ability to get to enlightenment. You just really need to keep that confidence up there and just know you're headed in the right direction. Any other questions you guys have? No questions? Okay. So I'll share this next topic with you guys about sharing the path to enlightenment, how to guide children along the path. As I mentioned, whether you have children or not, this topic is actually going to help you because there might be people in your life you're interested in sharing these teachings with. And there's going to be lessons here that you can pick up, whether it's you're sharing with your parents or your life partner or your friends or other people like that. You're never interested in giving unsolicited guidance to those types of people. With children, there's a certain role that you fulfill as a parent, that you need to guide this individual in order to be able to gain wisdom. That's what we do as parents. But all these other types of people, like your parents, your siblings, your life partner, people like this, that's not your role. So you need to make sure you understand that you're not interested in giving unsolicited guidance, because that would come from the mind's ego, where the mind thinks like, oh, I know what's right, and you're not doing something that's right, and I need to tell you what's right. Even when you understand the path to enlightenment and you know what you're doing is wise, it's still unwise to have ego and think that what you are doing is right and what other people are doing is wrong. And now you need to step into their life and tell them that. That's not what you're interested in doing. An individual who's cultivated their mind to get to the point where it's enlightened, all you need to do is walk with wisdom and a smile. You're not out there trying to convince people that what you know is quote unquote right. In fact, you don't even think that way anymore. It's not about right and wrong. It's not black and white. It's just that you know that these teachings are wise and they've led to this transformation to your mind and your life. And you don't feel an urge to go out there and convince other people of that. But there does become situations where you'd like to share the teachings with others, and you can see that, hey, this would really help this person. And you need to do that very humbly with those situations with your parents, siblings, life partners, and things like that. With children, it's more of kind of a certain effort to formally share it with this individual. With my son, I started teaching him formally when he was 6 years old. That's when we started sitting down and I started helping him. I'll kind of share some of that with you as we go through this. But I also think that the way that he was getting his training was even all the way back when he was in the womb with his mother. When he was in the womb with his mother, she was meditating during the time that we were spending time, because, we were living together during her pregnancy and all that kind of stuff, that, we thought about it as he was inside the womb, but he could still hear, even though there's skin there and he's inside the womb. Sometimes people think that the baby can't hear. So we weren't arguing. We weren't yelling and hollering. And I know that he could hear because I used to play the mandolin back then. And when I would play the mandolin, he would move around inside of her stomach. And then when he came out and he was actually able to walk around and stuff, I had stopped playing the mandolin for a long time because I got busy with work. I was in business at that time. And there was a time where he went over to my mandolin case and he picked up the mandolin. He couldn't even talk at that time. He picked up the mandolin and he gave it to me and he wanted me to play it. And whenever I would play it, he would actually fall asleep. So I knew that he could hear when he was inside the womb. So even though I formally started teaching him when he was 6, I think about it that he was in training all this time, even all the way back to the womb. And I'm going to explain some of that stuff with you as I share here about how you can actually train them, even when they're an infant, even when they're a toddler. There's things that you can teach them, even when they can't actually speak. So just like always, you guys can ask questions. I'm going to be pausing so that you guys can ask questions as we go. Okay, so the first thing is just kind of like setting a frame of mind about what you're doing on the path in terms of sharing the teachings with a child. One of the ways you might think about this is that the child is like this growing plant that you see here. And you are the plant enthusiast, interested in growing this plant and seeing this plant become nourished and healthy and a vibrant plant. The guide stake here that is guiding this plant, that's the teachings of the Buddha. And you would like to think about the teachings of the Buddha as being that guide. The plant is the actual child that's growing, and you're helping them to be able to understand the teachings of the Buddha, because that's going to help them to be guided in life. There's all kinds of parenting books out there. There's all kinds of parenting philosophies out there. There's all kinds of, controversial things or conflicting ideas about how to raise children and what to do and all this kind of stuff. If you learn the Eightfold Path for yourself, that's the only thing you'll actually ever need to learn and practice and share with a child. In fact, that's the very first step, is acquiring wisdom yourself. Is that if you acquire wisdom of the teachings of the Buddha, that's all you'll ever need to teach your child. If you teach your child the Eightfold Path, that's what you need to be able to guide them with. So you're going to need to learn it first. That's the first step of guiding other people on the path to enlightenment, is you need to learn it yourself. And when you're first starting to learn it, don't feel like you need to rush out there and start trying to teach other people the path. This path isn't about going out and convincing other people to learn and practice the path. This is a path for you. It's a path of self-development and inner growth. It's not about going out into the world and convincing other people that they should or shouldn't be doing any particular thing. So you'd always like to start with acquiring wisdom yourself. Understand that a child and, of course, a life partner, your parent, all these other people, they are their own being. It's really not my son. He's really not mine. He doesn't belong to me. He is his own being, making his own decisions. So if you keep that in mind, that he's not yours, and even though you might introduce your child that way, they need to acquire wisdom, because you are not permanent in their life, and they're going to need to be able to make decisions without you. So you are helping them to be able to cultivate wisdom themselves. After you've cultivated wisdom, you would like to then help them to cultivate wisdom, realizing that you are not permanent in their life. There's times where my son, as he's been growing up, he was in maybe third grade or fourth grade or fifth grade or what have you, and I needed to leave to go travel somewhere to teach for several weeks or maybe even a month or so. And as I would leave, I was confident that this boy would make wise decisions while I was away, because I had helped him to be able to understand wise decision making. I didn't worry about him. I wasn't thinking that, he's going to get in trouble in school or anything like that. I knew that he was capable of making wise decisions and that I was not permanent in his life, but I had been helping him and guiding him all these time in order to help him to be able to get to that point, but never thinking of him as my son. He doesn't belong to me. He is his own individual being. Like I was mentioning, you'd like to start early. Training really begins in the womb, because the child can actually hear when they're inside the womb. So if you and your partner are yelling and hollering and screaming and argumentative, this is going to affect the child. But if there's quietness, if there's peacefulness, if there's calmness in the home, as the child is growing inside the womb, this is going to be really helpful. So this training starts really early, even inside the womb. There were even things that we did when my son was just an infant and a toddler, because if you understand the Eightfold Path, that we practice mindfulness, watching over the mind, and anytime we see discontentedness arising, even as a bodily sensation, you apply right effort and you cut it off and let it go, and you cut it off and let it go. And one of the things that I taught you guys is to be able to redirect the mind, right? Like if you're watching the news and you're noticing the anger and frustration coming up, I taught you guys to redirect the mind. Go for a walk, go for a bike ride, go to the bathroom, wash your hands, get a glass of water from the kitchen, whatever it is, but don't just allow your mind to sit there and dwell in the anger. And eventually, if you do that enough where you redirect the mind, eventually the anger and frustration isn't going to arise, because you've eliminated the causes and conditions that are producing it. Eventually, you'll be able to sit there and just watch the news and you won't be angry. But in this period of time of training, wherever you see the anger arising, you'd like to redirect the mind. So a child doesn't have this wisdom. When they're an infant, when they're a toddler, you can't teach them to be able to cut off and let go of their discontentedness through formal training. But what you can do is you can do this redirection of their mind. We did this even when my son was an infant and a toddler. Say we're playing on the floor or something like this, You can usually see when a child's about to get frustrated or angry or something like this, or discontent, because they'll make that kind of face. They'll be like, and then it's right, because they're like playing with a toy and their toy breaks, and they don't usually just go right into crying. They usually kind of make these facial expressions first before they will actually start crying. So when you see this kind of thing going on, you can actually redirect their mind so that their mind can actually cut it off and let it go. They won't know what you're doing because they're too young, but if you understand the Eightfold Path and what needs to happen with the mind, you can actually do this with your child. So when my son would be playing and we would see that face coming, that he's about to become discontent, we would say, "Did you see that cloud outside? That is a beautiful cloud." And we would just kind of redirect his mind over to the cloud. And sometimes we would even get his hand and walk him over to the window to be able to see like a cloud or a squirrel or a bird or something like that. We just redirect his mind to something else. So by the time he was actually receiving formal training at 6 years old, his mind was already pretty calm. Like, this kid hardly ever cried when he was a kid. He didn't really have much discontentedness. His mind never got wired that way. In fact, there's something here in Thailand that they do that I think is wonderful. You know, normally when you have an infant, you put them in the bed, you put them in the crib, and then the parents go off and they're going to do whatever kind of work they're going to do in the house, preparing food, cleaning the house, whatever it is. Well, the child is sleeping, and when the child wakes up, it stays in the crib. But then eventually the child is going to start crying. And then when the child starts crying, the parents know that the baby is awake. And now the parents go and address the child, right? So basically what the child learns very early in infancy is that when I cry, mom and dad come and get me. Mom and dad show me attention. This is not wise at all, but this is the way the vast majority of the world does things. The way they do it here in Thailand is they have this little jewelry that they put on the ankles of their child, even as an infant, and it's got a little bell on it, and they put it on both of their ankles. And when they're sleeping in the crib, when the child's starting to wake up, they start moving around. That's the first thing that they start doing when they wake up. They're starting to move around, and the parents hear the bell, jing, 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 and you start hearing the bell, and now you know your child is waking up, and you go over to the crib and you address the child. They never get to the point where they have to cry in order to get attention from their parents. And my son, as he got older, he knew this, and sometimes he would sit there and laugh in his crib, and he would sit there and shake his he would shake his feet, and he would like kind of like call us with the bells, because he knew whenever I ring the bells, the parents come. So he would sit there and like laugh and joke and giggle, and he would like shake his feet, and we would come over to see him. So he never got his mind wired to the point where if I cry, my parents will address me and give me attention. So this is a really helpful thing, and it's very inexpensive. It's only like the equivalent of about $30 or $40 to purchase them here in Thailand. They're usually silver, and you can get them at like a silver store, and it's a great little present, and the kids really like it. And even when they start walking, it's really wonderful, because when they walk around, you can hear them like jing, 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 jing. It's really cute. It's a really nice sound. And he never got used to crying in order to get his parents' attention. So this is something that you would like to start early. These kinds of things are around for a reason, and the Thai people use this for a reason, because it really helps the child's mind, and it helps the parents to be able to take care of the child. Create a culture of cultivating and acquiring wisdom within your family. What I mean by that is there were times where I was taking my son to school, and on our ride to school, he was pretty young at the time. He was maybe like in second grade or something like that, or third grade. And he would ask me questions. We would have these great conversations, because this one school that he went to, it used to take us 45 minutes to get there and 45 minutes back. And in that journey, there would be a nice conversation that we're having every morning, every afternoon on the way home. We would be having great conversations, and he'd be asking me all kinds of questions about all kinds of things about the world. And sometimes he would ask me questions, and I was like, I don't know the answer to that question. I have no idea what the answer to that question is. And I would say, but you know who does? And he was like, who? Who knows the answer to that question? I say, Google knows, right? And I was like, there's my phone right there. I was like, why don't you Google that question and see what Google says. And then he would do it and he would like figure out. So he was learning two skills. One was he was learning how to use a search engine, but then he was also learning to acquire wisdom and to not rely on his dad, that his dad's not going to know every single answer to every single question. And then sometimes when he would Google something, he would come back with an answer. And I would say, what source did you use? And he would say, oh, I used this website. I was like, well, maybe you check another couple of websites so you don't just rely on one source. You can get many different opinions on the answer to that question. So he's got this culture of acquiring wisdom, that it doesn't just stop with dad, that you can look other places to acquire wisdom as well. So you'd like to kind of teach them to not just have a question, but seek out the answers to those questions. And don't just believe one source, but look for many sources. Don't just believe dad. Don't just follow what dad says. Don't just look at one source on Google, but look at many sources and acquire this wisdom and bring in this information. And this helps them to be able to cultivate wisdom. And I notice my son even does this now. If we're driving in the car together and he asks me a question, I'm like, I don't really know the answer to that question. He'll just pick up the phone and he'll do it himself. He'll actually look to see what the answer is. So you'd like to cultivate this culture of acquiring wisdom, because that's what's going to lead to improvement in their mind and in their life. That's the number one problem that the Buddha discovered, is that the unenlightened mind lacks wisdom. So you would like to always be helping them to cultivate wisdom. Understand that you're a role model in your child's life, that whatever you do, they're going to tend to follow you. So you're going to need to practice the same things that you actually teach. They're going to be looking to you. They're going to be learning just as much through your actions as they are through your spoken words. So be sure that whatever you're doing is wise, that when you're talking with your life partner, when you're talking with your parents, when you're talking with your siblings, you'd like to be using right speech. You like to be using right action. You'd like to be doing all the things that are wise, because they're learning from you every moment. Having respect towards your life partner, your parents, your grandparents, your siblings, elders, and people in the community. You're teaching your child how to interact with others. If you're disrespectful to your parents, you're teaching your child how to be disrespectful to their parents. So that's your karma. If you're disrespectful to your parents, your children are going to be disrespectful to you. If you're degrading and diminishing and slandering and gossiping about your parents and your siblings, your children are going to do exactly the same thing. So remember, you're going to disagree with the things that your parents do. That's normal, but you don't have to gossip and slander about them. And you don't have to say all those things to your child. You can just understand in your mind that you disagree with what your parents are saying, but you don't need to turn that into gossip and slander, because your children are learning how to treat you through the way that you treat your parents. So you'd like to be sure that you're always being respectful to all people around you. You're going to need to get comfortable with the struggle and allowing it to occur, whether it's a child or your parents or your siblings or your life partner. So we talked about this a bit yesterday, that's the way people learn. And you can offer people help. You can offer your life partner and your parents and people like this help, but oftentimes they're not interested in your help. With a child, they're sometimes going to struggle and have certain challenges, and you're going to need to allow that to occur. I'll give you one example of this. My son at one point was hanging out with these children in the village, and me and my wife, we knew that these boys were into things that weren't really wise. And my son was spending a lot of time with these boys playing in the village. And when he came home one day, we sat him down and we said, hey, we would like to let you know that we don't think it's wise for you to hang out with these boys, because they've been into some different things, and we don't think that it's going to be helpful for you to spend time around them. And he's like, yeah, but those are my friends. Those are my buddies. I want to spend time with them. Like, we go out or in the village and we ride bicycles together and we do this and we do that. We're like, okay, we understand. You spend time with whoever you like to spend time with, but we're just advising you that it's unwise to spend time with them. And in this situation, we weren't trying to control him. We weren't trying to force him. We were letting him make his own decisions because he's his own being, but we were giving him advice, right? And then we just stepped back, and he continued to spend time with them. It wasn't more than a few weeks later that he came home and he didn't have his bicycle helmet with him. And I said, what happened to your bicycle helmet? He said, well, I came out of my friend's house. We were all inside watching TV. And when I came out, my bicycle helmet was gone. And I said, well, who were the friends that were in the house? And he named all the friends. And I said, who's the friends that weren't in the house? And he named one friend. And I was like, oh, okay. he's probably got your bicycle helmet because it didn't just walk off by itself. So, of course, we needed to go talk to that boy and find out what happened. And of course, this boy stole this bicycle helmet. And eventually we got it back. So then we looked at my son and we said, this is what we were talking about. You're going to encounter problems with these boys if you continue to spend time with them. He's like, yeah, this was just a one-time situation. He didn't realize it wasn't his bicycle helmet. You know, he was making all these excuses. And we were like, okay, up to you. Do whatever you'd like to do. Well, it wasn't more than a few weeks later after that he came home and he was soaking wet. Right. And this wasn't a time of rain. This wasn't Songkran or anything like that. This was just a regular old time during the year. And he was soaking wet from head to toe. And we were like, what happened? You know, why are you so wet? And he was like, oh, I was riding my bike and a gang of those boys, they stopped me and they took a bucket of water and they dumped it over my head. And I was like, oh, okay. Was that fun? Did you enjoy that? Was that loving kindness? Was that, you know, compassion? You know, what was that they were doing? He's like, no, that was their ill will. And I was like, oh, okay. So now he started to see it. And I was like, are you still planning to spend time with these boys? He said, no, I think, Dad, I'm done. I'm not going to spend time with these boys anymore. So we needed to allow that struggle to happen, because after that, he started going to schools. Of course, he was going to these all different schools. And each time he would go to a school, he would make friends at these schools. And whenever I would meet these friends, they were always very nice. They were always very polite, very respectful. So I noticed that in the village, the first group of friends that he had, he didn't make very wise choices, but we let him experience those choices and see the struggles. Then once he started going to school and he was making friends in school, he started to make wise choices about who to spend time with, because he learned that wisdom through the struggle. He could see through that struggle in the village how to make wise friends. And that's something that he learned. And that's the wisdom that he cultivated. So instead of us forcing him to not hang out with those boys, we let him go through that struggle so that he could cultivate the wisdom of how to make good friends. And it actually worked, because now whenever he goes to different schools, or maybe he's on a sports team or something like that, we notice that he always tends to make friends that are into really wholesome things. So you're going to need to allow the struggle to happen in certain situations. You know, if your son or your daughter is getting ready to cross the street and there's a truck that's going to come and plow them down and kill them, of course you're going to grab their hand and pull them back, right? That's not what I'm talking about here. But there's things like this about friends that instead of trying to control them about what friends they should have, let them have those friends that are into unwholesome things when they're young like that, because there's only so much harm that is going to happen in that situation. And now it's at a time where they can learn to cultivate the wisdom. Whereas if you control them of what friends they can have all the way through their life, and it's not until they're 18 or 20 that they're actually making their own choices about who to be their friends, they haven't cultivated the wisdom of how to be friends and how to select friends at that point. So now making friends at 18 or 20 years old and making mistakes with the lack of wisdom, it's going to be much more impactful to them than if you allow them to do that when they're younger. When they're younger, if they make some mistakes about who to spend time with, it's not going to impact them as significantly as it will when they're 18 or 20 or 25. So let them make those mistakes when they're young. That's why you're there, to be able to guide them in those situations. So get comfortable with this struggle and allowing it to occur. You're going to need to help your children eliminate attachment to you, because if your children are attached to you, they're going to experience discontentedness. When you come home from work, they're going to be so happy and excited. But when you go on that business trip for 2 weeks, they're going to feel miserable and they're going to be missing you and they're going to be so sorrowful. This is not love. This is craving, desire, attachment. So where you see your children are attached, because they will be attached to you, you're going to need to help them to eliminate it. Some of the things you can do is like have them sleep at other people's houses, like maybe like an aunt or an uncle or a grandma or grandpa, and you can go away for a while. They can have sleepovers at their friend's house, them getting comfortable with you being impermanent in their life. This will help them. It's also helpful to not incentivize excitement when you come home from work. Because if you do that and they get so excited when you come home, that means when you're gone for 2 weeks on a business trip, they're going to be sad and they're going to be missing you. So sometimes parents like that excitement when they come home, their kids are running out of the house. Yay, mommy's home, daddy's home. But you got to see the other side of that they're going to be feeling miserable when you're gone, right? So help them to eliminate their attachment so that their mind isn't clinging by helping them to spend time with other people, even sleeping over and stuff like this. This really helps their mind to be able to let go. You're going to need to have patience as you're teaching anybody, including children, because people don't just learn things right away at the snap of a finger and implement the things that you've taught them. It's going to be gradual training, gradual practice, and gradual progress, just like you. That's the way you learn. Children are the same way. You're going to need to have a lot of patience with them. I can't even tell you how many times me and my son have talked about lying. Many, 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 many times we've talked about lying, and he still lies. He just lied to me the other day, right? Something very significant. I can't even tell you. It's way more than 100 times that we've sat down and talked about how unwise it is that he's lying, right? So you're going to need to have this patience to understand that you're not going to teach them something once and then they're going to do it perfectly after that. It's going to be many, 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 many conversations. So you can't have a craving or an expectation that just because you talked about it once, they're going to immediately implement what you taught them. It's going to be many, 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 many conversations. Be creative and have fun, because children usually like to learn through games and activities. In fact, this is the way I first started teaching my son, is that I started playing games with him. That's how I taught him about the universal truth of impermanence. I first sat him down for like a minute or two, and I taught him the description of the universal truth of impermanence, because that's where he needed to start, just like you. But then we played a game. After I taught him the universal truth of impermanence, I said, hey, why don't we go out in the village and do a scavenger hunt? Do you know what a scavenger hunt is? I don't know if you guys know what a scavenger hunt is. You guys don't know what that is? No? Okay, a scavenger hunt is where you have like a list of items and you go around and you try to find these items. It's kind of like a treasure hunt where you're going out looking for treasure. So I said, hey, would you like to do a scavenger hunt? And he's like, sure, let's go do that. I was like, okay, let's go out in the village and see if we can find something that's permanent, right? So we were going around the village and he's looking for things that are permanent and he's trying to find things. Well, of course, he couldn't find anything that was permanent, so we switched it. And I said, hey, why don't we look for things that are impermanent? And he's like, okay, Daddy, let's look for things that are impermanent. So he's walking around the village and he's like, oh, look, there's green leaves in the tree and then there's brown leaves on the ground. That's impermanence. I was like, yeah, good job. High five. And he's like, oh, look at the fence. The fence over there has paint and it looks brand new. But this one over here, it's faded. That's impermanence. It's like, yeah. So he was like learning this impermanence through this game and activity. And we created many different games for him that he was actually able to play to learn not just impermanence, but a lot of the other teachings as well. So be creative and create nice, fun games that they can learn through. It's important not to force your children. As you guys heard me say the other day, I don't force my son to meditate. I don't force him to learn these teachings. These are teachings that he was interested in learning. He actually came to me and he said, Dad, I would like you to teach me the Buddhist teachings. He's like, I know that they work and I can see that you and Mom are having better relationship, and I would like to have a better relationship with Mom too. Can you teach me the Buddhist teachings? He asked me to be able to teach him. So you would like them to be interested in choosing to learn on their own, and you're not forcing it on them. You need to start small and then build from there. The way that I first started teaching my son is when he was 6 years old. I was actually watching TV at the time, sitting on the sofa. He was on the floor over there, and I was sitting there and I was understanding how impactful the Buddhist teachings had been for my life. And I realized that I was going to need to teach this boy these teachings, because he's never going to be able to live a wonderful life if he doesn't understand how to train his own mind. But I also realized in that same moment that I'd never really tried to teach him much at all up to that point in his life. And I wasn't even sure whether he'd be willing to actually learn with me or not. So I didn't just assume that because I'm his father, he's going to learn from me and he's going to take heed to the advice that I have to share. So the way that I started is I said to him, I said, Bailan, can you hand me the TV remote control? I had never even asked him something like that before up to that point. And he's like, sure, daddy. And he grabbed the remote control and he handed it to me. And I was like, oh, wow. He just did what I asked him to. That's pretty cool. So then about 20 minutes later, he was in the kitchen getting himself a glass of water. And I wasn't even thirsty, but I said, Bailan, can you get me a glass of water? And he's like, sure, daddy, I'll get you a glass of water. You can have this one. And he handed me his glass of water. And I was like, oh, wow. This kid just followed what I said. That was pretty cool. So from that point forward, I started gradually starting to teach him, right? So you need to start small with really small things and then gradually build from there. Don't just jump in and start teaching a 6-year-old kid the Four Noble Truths. You would like to slowly and gradually build. You're going to need to get comfortable with mistakes because as you're teaching people, you're going to make mistakes. It's not until you've taught many, many hundreds and thousands of people that you're going to know how to do it really, really well, and you're not going to be making any mistakes. So you're going to make mistakes along the way. As you're creating fun games, as you're creating these activities for children, as you're explaining things to your parents or your brothers and sisters, you're going to make mistakes in the way that you're explaining things. And just get comfortable with that, and then just work to do better and better each time when you are explaining things. There's proactive training and there's real-time training. I'll explain to you the difference. Proactive training is kind of like getting ahead of the curve and explaining things about the teachings long before this person even really potentially needs them. Real-time training is actually training them in the moment when something is actually happening where their mind is actually maybe even discontent. I'll give you examples of this. When I sat down and I talked to my son about the universal truth of impermanence, and we went outside and we did the scavenger hunt, that is proactive training. I am now actively training him. His mind's not discontent. He's learning proactively ahead of time, right? But then there was times where I did real-time training. After he learned the universal truth of impermanence, and I taught him the Four Noble Truths, that it was craving, desire, attachment that was causing his discontentedness, and I was confident that he understood it because I checked in many times to make sure he understood it. I then started creating situations where I could do real-time training. There were times where he used to do Legos, and he would put Legos together. I think you guys know what Legos are, right? Those building tools or toys. So he would build these Lego toys, and then he would go to school and he would leave them in the house on the floor. So what I would do is I would go over to where his toys were and I would break up his Legos into like 4, 5, 6 pieces. This big thing that he had built, I would break it up into a few pieces. And then he would come home from school and he would see his Legos were broken up and he would start crying. He would get discontent and he would get down on the floor and he'd be crying and crying and crying. So I would get down on the floor with him and I'd be like, what's going on, Bailan? What's happening? He's like, my Legos are broken. Oh, I don't know what happened. My Legos are broken. I was like, I think you know what happened. You know what happened here. He's like, no, I don't. I was at school. I have no idea what happened. I was like, are your Legos permanent? He's like, no, they're not permanent. Everything around us is impermanent, but I want my Legos back. And so I would just sit there and talk to him, right? And this is real-time training where I would kind of discuss with him what was going on. So then he would put his Legos back together, and I was like, see, they're not permanently together, but they're not permanently broken either. You can put them back together. So then he would kind of calm down after a little while. So then I'd wait about a week or so. And then when he would go to school, I would break up his Legos again. And then he would come home and he would see his Legos and he would, but it would be done in about 3 seconds or 5 seconds. And he'd start putting his Legos back together. So then I'd wait another week or so and I'd break up his Legos and he'd come home from school and he'd look at the Legos and he'd look at me and he'd look at the Legos and he'd look at me and he'd say, you broke my Legos, didn't you? I said, yep, I sure did. He said, okay, I'm just going to put them back together. I said, perfect, excellent, right? So there was no discontentedness. This is where you need to be comfortable with the struggle. If you're attached to your child, you won't do these things that I'm talking about because you will feel painful feelings when you see that they're crying. But if you understand that you are not causing their discontentedness, it's their craving, in order for them to get rid of that craving, they're going to have it triggered in order for them to train their mind to let it go. The way that I talk about this is it's kind of like walking through the fire in order to appreciate the fresh air on the other side. You're going to have to do this with your cravings, desires, attachments, and your children are going to need to do the same thing. So, for example, if you have an attachment to that big piece of chocolate cake at the restaurant, and every time you go to the restaurant, you eat that piece of chocolate cake. Well, when you start showing up to the restaurant and you don't eat your chocolate cake, it's going to be somewhat painful. It's going to be hurting your mind, right? Because you really want that chocolate cake and you're not eating it. It's going to be painful. You're going to have to walk through the fire in order to appreciate the fresh air on the other side. Your children are going to need to do the same thing. And your life partner and your parents and all these other people, it's kind of like joining the mafia. When you join the mafia, you might have all these pleasant feelings. I don't know. I've never joined the mafia, but someone might be actually really happy. It's like, wow, I got all these new friends. I've got all this new way to make money. I've got this protection. Oh, wow, this feels great to join the mafia. But when you get out of the mafia, from what I understand, it's very painful, right? When you're leaving out of the mafia, it's not an easy thing to do. It's very painful. Well, it's the same thing, is if you've been eating that chocolate cake and you've been getting all these pleasant feelings from the chocolate cake, when you try to walk away from that, it's very painful. Or if you've been getting a lot of pleasant feelings holding on to this mobile phone and playing with the mobile phone and surfing the internet and doing social media, when you start setting this aside for 8 hours a day, 10 hours a day, and you don't touch it for a really long time and you're training your mind to let it go, it's going to be very painful because you got those pleasant feelings from your cravings, desires, attachments. And now when you're training your mind to let that go, your mind's not getting what it wants, and it's very painful for the mind. So the same thing is going to need to happen for your children. So that's why I knew that when he was experiencing that discontentedness with the Legos being broken up, this is part of the process. And I wasn't upset. I wasn't discontent. The fact that he was discontent, I knew that this was part of the solution, that he was going to have to walk through the fire in order to get to the fresh air on the other side. So now he has many Legos and he plays with these Legos from time to time now at this age, but he doesn't have any discontentedness related to them. He can just enjoy playing with the Legos without the discontentedness. But he had to experience that discontentedness because he was getting such pleasant feelings because his mind was attached to them. And now when his mind was eliminating that attachment, it was very painful for him. But now he's on the other side of that, where he can enjoy the Legos. And every once in a while, he comes home and maybe there was an earthquake or something and one of his Legos, got broken, but he doesn't have any crying. He's not upset. He's not discontent. He just understands he can put them back together. It's no big deal. So this is proactive training where you're actively training them ahead of time, like going to do the scavenger hunt. But then there's real time training where in the moment that they're experiencing discontentedness, they come home and their boyfriend broke up with them or their girlfriend broke up with them, or they get a bad grade at school and they're crying and they're upset, or maybe they lost their pencil at school or something like this, their favorite pen or something like this. And now when they come home, they're frustrated about that. That's real time training in the moment where you can help them see that their mind's having craving, desire, attachment. So there's more to share with you here, but I'm going to pause here and see what questions you guys might have about the things that I've been talking about so far. Is there any questions you guys have about what I'm talking about so far? Yeah. Yeah. Can you use the mics? They're working now because you guys changed the batteries. We have a bunch of people online joining us.
Oh, good.
Mhm.
So I had an interesting situation with my daughter yesterday. She's 15
Mhm.
and she is planning to go to her first prom on Friday. And very, very, very late planning in terms of what she wants to wear. I think we went a week ago, about 2 weeks ago, to like find something. We couldn't find anything. And then we decided we were going to make something. So we went for her dress fitting yesterday, and she puts it on and she doesn't like this dress.
but nor does she want to tell the dressmaker what changes she wants to make. Because we don't speak Thai, she gets, I mean, we were also tired and hungry and it was a long day, but she just wanted to leave. And so we get in the car and I'm like sitting there and I'm feeling bad because she doesn't like her dress. We go to the mall and then we start talking about options. And then I call my sister and the three of us are talking about it. And my sister's telling her that, when you make a new dress and it's a dressmaker, it's sort of like baking a cake and this is step one and you go, back and forth and refine it to what you want it to. And she's like, nope, I'm not wearing it. And I did get frustrated because I was like, you're paying all this money and you don't even want to tell the lady what you want to fix. Because I felt if you try and tell her what to fix and she doesn't fix it, at least we tried, and then don't wear the dress. But if you're not even willing to try the dress on, then like, I think that's a waste.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, so my question is, like, how do I manage the situation in a sense that, like, it's my money, my time,
Mm-hmm.
and she is just not even wanting to try.
Yeah.
So it's like, I want to not get frustrated, but there's all this energy and time, but she needs to learn, like,
Yeah. So in order to get to a solution, it's always helpful to understand the problem, right? So what she's experiencing is personal existence view, that very first fetter, where she wants to be perceived by others in a certain way, right? That's common for someone who hasn't trained their mind on this path. They're going to have these 10 fetters. And that very first fetter of personal existence view is where the mind's clinging to your self-image and your self-identity, wanting to be perceived by others in a certain way. And when she looks at this dress, she thinks, I'm not going to be perceived the way I want to be perceived, and I'm uncomfortable wearing this dress, right? But then she's also having the same thing where she doesn't want to talk to the dressmaker in order to make modifications because she wants to be perceived by that person in a certain way. So she's having personal existence view, and there's craving and clinging there. On your side, it sounds like you're maybe craving the money, holding on to the money, which is understandable where you're at in your practice. And then there's probably some other cravings too, wanting her to be happy and wanting her to enjoy the dress and stuff like that, right? So knowing that both of you guys are having craving and clinging, now you need to create an environment where you can let her know what you're able to do and what you're capable of doing. If I was you, what I would do in the situation, and whether you choose to do this or not is a choice for you. Don't just follow what I'm saying, but do what you think is best, because you're the only one that knows all the variables. Is I would say something to the daughter like, hey, look, daughter, I understand that you don't like this dress, and I understand that you're not interested in talking with the dressmaker, but I'd like to let you know that this is the money that I can spend. I've already spent this money for this dress, and I'm incapable of spending anything more than that. So there's not going to be an option to buy a second dress. So if you're going to wear a dress to the prom, and you'd like a new dress, this is the one. You're going to need to overcome your craving, your shyness of talking to the dressmaker, and you're going to need to talk to her and let her know what to change, because unfortunately mom can't afford to buy a second dress. And then you just leave that with her, and she might get angry and frustrated when you share that with her, but that's her understanding that now she knows that, okay, if I'm going to get a new dress, it's going to be this. And now it might take 2, 3, 4, 5 days before she builds up the ability to now talk with the dressmaker. But it sounds like the prom's coming up tomorrow, right? So she doesn't really have much time.
No.
But that's what I would have done, is I would have said, hey, look, this is what I'm capable of doing. I was able to afford this dress. I'm not able to get a second one. And if you're going to wear a dress to prom, it's going to need to be this dress or something that you already have, because I can't afford a second dress.
Yeah, I think I'm very interested in her learning to, like, there's a consequence, but also that, just not to take things for granted.
Yeah.
And that's been hard to teach.
This is where you need to allow the struggle to happen, get comfortable with the struggle. And if ultimately she decides, I'm not going to go to prom, you need to be comfortable with that too. right? Because that might
That's
be
the
the
hardest
ultimate
part.
decision, right? That might be the ultimate
Yeah.
decision. You just need to be comfortable with whatever decision she makes. And now you know in the future, if you ever need to pay for clothes to be made for her, and that's what your choice is, you need to kind of talk with her up front and say, hey, look, we did this before where I purchased a dress. You never wore it. You never modified it. I ended up wasting that money. I'm willing to buy this particular thing for you, but I need you to be really attentive to the details. And if it comes back and you don't like it, are you going to be willing to talk to the dressmaker to be able to modify it? Because I'm not interested in getting in that same situation that we had last time. And if she says, yes, I'm willing to do that, say, okay, now I'm willing to pay. But if she says, no, I'm not willing to do that, mom, okay, well, I'm not willing to pay the money for the dress then. That's what you would like to do in the future, because you don't know how this is going to turn out. She's either going to modify the dress that you've got for her. She's either going to wear something she already has. She's probably going to maybe get a dress from a friend, or she's going to choose to not go to prom at all. And you've got to be comfortable with whatever decision she makes, and don't try to impose on her that she should do it one way or another. Let her decide for herself. But it sounds like you're stopping with, I'm not buying another dress. In my opinion, that's wise, and that's part of the consequences that she needs to see. Because even if you could afford another dress, let's just say you had tons of money, I still wouldn't buy a second dress, because she needs to learn that, hey, we're not just going to abandon this effort just because you're uncomfortable talking to the dressmaker, and we're not going to abandon that and just go spend more money somewhere else. So you're wise not to spend money for a second dress. And you're going to need to get comfortable with that no matter what the outcome is. Even if she's upset, she's at home, all her friends are at prom, she's looking miserable walking around the house, you're going to just need to be comfortable with that and understand that's part of the learning process.
I think that's the hardest part of it all.
That's your craving and attachment to
Yes,
your
for
daughter.
me. It's
So that's
me.
where, after you get your Eightfold Path well underway, you're going to need to do that reflection of death that we talked about yesterday in order to help you get rid of your attachment to your daughter. Mhm.
Then I have a second one. I think this is a little bit. So I have a sister, and she has a daughter who's 2 years younger, and her parenting style is a lot different from my parenting style. But it was an interesting conversation that we had also yesterday. But we started talking about the kids and dating, where, at this age, the girls are like curious about the boys, and sometimes they can have these boyfriend girlfriend situations that are like 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and it's done.
Yeah.
And my sister told me, she's like, my kid asked me, when can she start dating? And my sister was like, yo, we can have the conversation when you're 16. And I was like, that's like old.
Mhm.
And then when I speak to my kids about their cousin, they always tell me, this child is very lonely, this child is very restricted, this
Mhm.
child they tell me stories about what she does behind her parents' back. So I mean, it's a conflicting situation, because I have a very close relationship with my kids and they tell me a lot of things. But to keep their confidence, I can't just go to my sister and be like,
Yeah.
hey, your kid's doing all this stuff. But then
Mhm.
there's this concern, and also it's unsolicited advice.
Yeah.
I think in the past, when I tried to tell my sister about stuff about her daughter, my sister would become very abrasive and not
Yeah.
listen. So over time, I've learned to just keep quiet.
Yeah.
But as an aunt, and seeing the situation and watching this, like, sometimes it's very innocent but stupid things that she does,
Mhm.
right? But so I was talking to my daughter about it, because she's also been in the situation where it's like, boys yes, boys no. Now she's like, they all suck. And I'm like, cool, that's great, they do. Let's leave them alone. But she came, like you said, like I saw her come to her own decision on it.
Yeah.
And I didn't need to, there was the exposure and we talked, but I didn't have to say, don't date. She just figured it out,
Mhm.
But how do you approach the situation now with my sister, where it's like, she's unwilling, like my kids are like, she's so sheltered, she doesn't do anything, and she's so sad. And
Yeah.
she goes to them, she's like, how do I have a close relationship with your mom, like with my mom, like how you guys have it? But she's not, and we far away. So how do I navigate with my sister? Because I feel every time I pick it, like say one or two things, my sister's just so resistant and doesn't want to hear anything. But there's this little girl at the same time who's like growing up like how I did, which was very restricted. Like the mistakes I made as an adult was so much higher consequence, exactly like you said.
Mhm.
And you want to prevent it, but I can't. You know.
Yeah. So the first part that you were talking about, how you're not interested in giving your sister unsolicited guidance, that's why. Because once you give unsolicited guidance, they're oftentimes their ego is going to come at you, because unsolicited guidance is coming from your ego. So if you put out ego is going to come back to you. That's why she's going to come at you the way that she is. So it's wise not to give unsolicited guidance. Also, if you went to your sister and told her all the things that her daughter was into, this is gossiping and slandering her daughter. And now you're going to have problems with daughter too. Not just with mom, but with daughter too. So you're not interested in doing that. Understand that what daughter is experiencing, that is her karma. That's the results of her decision. She was born into that family. She has that particular mother. And however your sister chooses to parent her, that's her choices. And you need to be able to step back and just realize that you doing what you know to be wise, your sister's doing what she thinks is wise. And now whatever plays out as a result of that, that's their karma. I'll give you an example of this so you can understand. My my wife's sister, at one point, she's no longer alive. She's dead now. But at one point, she was married to this man who she had kids with, and we found out that he was cheating on our sister, right? Because we actually suspected he was cheating. And one day, me and my wife, he was supposed to be leaving to go to the temple at 2 a.m. in the morning. And we were like, he's not going to no temple at 2 a.m. in the morning. So we like dressed up in all black. We got on our black motorbikes. We like followed him on these black motorbikes. And we saw that he picked up this girl and, went to wherever they went to, right? Well, nonetheless, we knew that he was cheating on our sister. And our sister came to us like 2 days later and said, hey, I think my husband's cheating on me. What do you guys think? And what my wife said to her was, hey, sister, keep your eyes open, right? Keep your eyes open and look around. Instead of telling her like, yeah, we saw him 2 days ago picking up this girl and da. We didn't tell all that stuff, right? She just said, keep your eyes open and look around. Well, about a few days after that, she found this girl's underwear in her car underneath of her seat. And so sister got the evidence herself. We never delivered that evidence. And now she went and talked to her husband. They did whatever they're going to do. They separated, all that good stuff. But nonetheless, our sister ended up dying from cancer at a very young age in her early 30s. And her children are still alive, of course, with her husband. Her daughter is now like 17, 18 years old. Her son is like 8 or 9 years old. We have a wonderful relationship with him and his family and those kids, and we help those kids. They come over our house all the time and we help them. We would have never been able to do that had we gossiped and slandered about her husband and damaged the relationship, because you end up becoming the fall guy, right, between these two people that are having issues. Because when they start having issues, they're going to look for someone else to blame, and they're going to kind of look to the person who's doing the gossiping and slandering typically. So you just stay out of it the same way you do when your children are telling you what's going on with their cousin. This is them also gossiping and slandering. That's actually an opportunity for you to teach them that it's unwise to gossip and slander like that. So if I was you, I would use it as a lesson to help them to see that that's unwise for them to even be telling you those things. But then you definitely aren't interested in going and talking to sister, because that's going to produce unwholesome results for you. You've got to get comfortable with that struggle too, right?
I mean, all of that makes absolute sense. Then where is how do they, what is a wiser approach for them to be able to speak openly and freely about their concerns if they feeling that this might be causing the child harm?
The only thing that's happening here is they have a craving for their cousin to have a certain type of life. And when they see their cousin isn't having that kind of life, they think something's wrong, and they're coming to you and telling you about all this stuff. Where in reality, they just got to get comfortable to understand they're being parented in one way and their cousin is being parented in another way. This is impermanence. and they just need to get comfortable with that. And they don't need to take exception with it. It's just different than what they're experiencing. And it doesn't mean that it's right or it's wrong. It's just different. And there doesn't need to be any kind of even discussion about it. It's just like, yeah, they do things differently and no big deal. But oftentimes the mind with craving, they probably want their cousin to have the same experience that they're having. And now they think something's wrong because cousin's not doing that and experiencing that same life that they're living. So they're coming to you thinking something's wrong and that you guys somehow have to change and in order to get her to parent the same way as you, where that's the mind's craving for everyone to do things a certain way, where if your sister is parenting differently than you, then that's her choice, right? My sister parented differently than me when I was growing up as well, or while her kids were growing up as well, because the way that you'll parent is typically the way you were parented, right? So it sounds like your sister has adopted the same methods that your parents adopted, but you chose to do things differently than your parents, right? So that was the same way that me and my sister grew up, is that my sister adopted what my parents did, but I chose to do things differently than my parents. So when I saw my sister doing things like hitting her children, if I was there, I couldn't say anything. That was her choice. I can't step in and say, no, stop. She would spank them for the things that they would do. I wouldn't hit them. I don't hit my son. I've never hit my son, but some people choose to hit their children and that's their choice. And I can't step into that because that's their life and their decisions, how they choose to do things. So you just got to get comfortable to understand your sister is making decisions about her life. Her daughter is experiencing whatever she's experiencing, and you guys aren't there to impose what you think is right or wrong for their life. It's their life.
It might also be a little bit of ego than maybe just like, I'm doing it better. Oh, haven't you learned? Or something like that. So I think I hear you. It's more. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. I've never talked to my sister about the way she used to hit her children. I've never discussed it. I remember when I was a kid, me and my sister used to talk about it because we used to get beat as children. And I remember talking to my sister, telling her I'll never hit my children. I don't ever want my children to experience what we're experiencing. And she agreed with me as a 8-year-old child, 10-year-old child. But when she got older, she probably forgot and she reverted to what she knew, which was this is the way she was parented. So that's the way she parented. And, I don't know what her children do because they're now parents themselves. She had children very young. Her children are like in their 30s. They may or may not hit their children. I don't know what they do. But this is the cycle that happens, and you're choosing to end that cycle, but your sister hasn't. She hasn't gained that wisdom yet, but she's going to experience the consequences of her decisions. At some point, her daughter is going to get older. She's probably going to do opposite of what her mom's teaching her, and her mom's going to have a really difficult time with that. It's just going to happen when it happens, and you'd like to stay away from that and just let it happen for them so that you're not in the middle of it.
Yeah, comparatively, I know you're not, but in my home or when I'm with them, there is a lot more conflict that they're experiencing.
Mm-hmm.
I experience it too with my kids. It's just less frequent and more spread out.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's currently what we're seeing, since I moved to Thailand. So I think that's why I'm like, God, you could be so much more peaceful in your home, but and I think as you're speaking, I'm realizing maybe that's what I'm desiring. I'm desiring a peaceful home and but she was wanting something else, and that's okay.
Yeah. Her life's going to be different than yours. It's going to look different than yours. And you just got to get comfortable with that and eliminate your craving for their life to be the same as your life and what you're trying to get towards. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. So let's move on to the next part here. Be prepared for detours as you're teaching children or anybody else. Let's just say you're on the way to take your children to school. Let's just say you have 2 children and they're pretty young. Let's just say they're 6 and 8 years old. And on your way to school, they're fighting. about putting on their shoes and their jackets and stuff like this. Well, you're going to need to be prepared for detours, meaning that you might need to pause in that situation. And they might need to show up to school late because maybe you need to sit here for 5 minutes or 10 minutes and talk to them and explain to them how unwise they are about the thing that they're choosing to do. So you're going to need to be prepared for detours and don't have a craving to do things a certain way. Here's another example. One time we were on our way to play miniature golf because my son used to like to play miniature golf. And on our way to miniature golf, we were in the car and my son was talking and he was like, man, I can't wait to get you on the course. I'm going to beat you. I'm going to walk you up and down that course. I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. His ego was coming out, right? He was being very conceited about how he was going to beat me at mini golf, right? And I was like surprised, first of all, because he was only like 7 or 8 years old. And I was like, really? Is that the way you're going to play with me? He's like, yeah, I'm going to beat you. I'm going to do this. The scorecard ain't even going to be able to handle the number of points that I'm going to get or something like this, right? He's really going off with his ego. And I was like, you know what? I don't even think I'm interested in playing golf. He was like, yeah, I didn't think so. You don't want to get beat. That's the reason why you don't want to play golf. And I was like, wow, you've got an enormous ego here. I was like, you know what? I'm just going to go home. I don't like to play with people who have ego. And I started turning the car around and I was headed home. And that's what I chose to do in that situation. Whereas if you have a craving to go play mini golf, you won't be willing to turn around and go back home, right? So in certain situations, you're going to need to teach your child something. And part of that is you're going to need to be ready for a detour. That even though you're planning to show up to a party or you're planning to show up to school or you're planning to go play mini golf, you need to be willing to be late or maybe not even go at all in order to teach them a lesson that, hey, if you're conceited, if you're arrogant, if you're prideful, people aren't going to be interested in playing games with you. And that's the lesson that he learned in that situation. And now I notice when he goes to the basketball court and when he plays games with people, he doesn't have ego. He's learned that very early in life that people don't want to play games with you when you have ego. So you're going to need to be willing to take detours as part of the lesson to learn. Always be supportive and encouraging when you're teaching children. It's important to not talk about their mistakes, so to speak, as something wrong with them as a person, but instead talk about their decisions. Instead of talking about him being a bad person or he's bad, instead we talk about his wise and unwise decisions. That we talk about, this particular decision could be made better, or that particular decision could be made better. So I never talk about him as a person. We always talk about his decisions, but it's always supportive and encouraging when I talk with him. You'd like to eliminate your anger and aggressiveness. It's really unwise to shout and hit and yell and scream at children because you're just teaching them fear. They get very fearful and they might do the things that you ask them to do and that you're yelling and hollering and screaming at them to do, but they're only doing it based in fear. And that means that they're only going to do that thing as long as the fear is there. When the fear is gone, they won't do that thing. What you're looking to do is you're looking to help them cultivate wisdom so that they'll make that decision whether you're there or not. If they have wisdom, knowing something is wise, they will choose to do that thing whether you're there or not. But if you teach them out of fear and they're only doing that thing because they're fearful, they're only going to do that thing as long as their fear is there. And their fear is not permanent, right? So you would like to help them cultivate wisdom by eliminating any kind of anger and aggressiveness that you have. If your mind is angry and frustrated, it's not the time to sit down and teach your child. You need to eliminate your anger first. And if that takes a few hours or a few days before you can talk to your child about that particular thing, then do that. Get rid of that anger so that when you sit down and talk to them, you can have a clear head and you can discuss with them what they need to learn so that then when they cultivate that wisdom, they'll start making those wise decisions more and more readily. Understand the difference between firm speech and harsh speech. In the teachings of the Buddha, he talks about with some students, he actually uses firm speech. But there's a difference between firm speech and harsh speech. I don't usually teach students through firm speech, but I have taught my son through firm speech before. The Buddha teaches that first, when he teaches a student, he uses the gentle method. And then if the gentle method doesn't work, he will use the stern method. And then if the stern method doesn't work, he will use the gentle and stern method. And if the gentle and stern method doesn't work, the Buddha says, then I kill my students. And people asked him, they're like, what are you talking about? You kill your students. You can't kill your students. Like, you teach not to kill. And he says, killing my students is to not talk to them and not to teach them. If I don't teach them and I don't speak to them, that's like killing my students, right? So there are situations where you might think the Buddha would teach everybody and anybody. Yeah, a Buddha will teach everybody and anybody, but ultimately, if they're trying to teach them and the person is just not heeding their advice and they're just not learning, eventually the Buddha is just going to stop teaching them. That's what he meant by killing his students. Well, there's this firm speech that I don't suggest you use with students. I don't typically teach students through firm speech, but I have taught my son through firm speech. What firm speech is where you've learned in the 5 factors of well-spoken speech that the Buddha teaches to speak gentle, right? This is where you pay attention to your tone, your tempo, and your word choice. You'd always like to speak gentle. But if you're teaching a child and you've taught them many times, maybe 3, 4, 5, 6 different times about a particular topic, and they just aren't paying attention, they just aren't applying priority to be able to implement that new lesson, that wisdom, you might need to firm up your tone and your tempo in order to help them see how serious it is. So I'll give you an example of this. With my son, with the lying, we sat down many times and talked about the lying. And we talked about how important it is to tell the truth and what the consequences are if you don't tell the truth in terms of day-to-day life and relationships and things like that. And he understood. And after about 6 or 8 times, he still was lying. He was still lying. And, normally I would say, Bailan, it's unwise for you to lie. This is really unwise, right? This is me having gentle speech. And I did that many times. But then after that wasn't working, I needed to firm things up a little bit. And I was using the same word choice, but I was changing my tone and my tempo. Instead of saying, Bailan, it's unwise for you to be lying, I would say, Bailan, it's unwise for you to be lying, right? A little bit firmer, right? So I'm not angry. I'm not speaking harshly and aggressively. There's no hostility behind it. It's just firming up the tone and tempo. Bailan, it's really unwise to be lying. You shouldn't be lying. This is going to cause you difficulties in life. Instead of, Bailan, it's really unwise to lie. It's going to cause you difficulties in life. So you just firm it up a little bit. And you're not going to do that at the very beginning. And you're not going to do that every single time, because eventually it loses its ability to be impactful, right? So my son, when I firm up my speech, he knows his dad is serious because I hardly ever use that. But every once in a while, I need to use that firmer speech. So there's no hostility. There's no anger or frustration behind it. It's just changing the tone and tempo a little bit in order for them to know that you're serious about what you're talking about. So there's a difference between firm speech and harsh speech, and knowing the difference and then using it selectively. Even the Buddha used to do this. Remember, you're imparting wisdom. That's the whole goal, right? You're not punishing. You're not doing those kinds of things. You're helping them to learn wisdom. You're going to need to have these little mini lessons and repeat those things over and over and over again. So in those little conversations that me and my son would have when we were driving to school, there were these little 30-second lessons here and there. Sometimes we'd be driving down the street and he would see a dog dead on the side of the street that got hit by a car. And he'd be like, Dad, I just saw that dead dog back there. And I was like, oh, what is that all about? Why do we die? And he would say, oh, this is impermanence. Sometimes we're alive and sometimes we die. Because we were born, we had to die. And I'm like, yes, exactly. So I give him these little lessons along the way, and then he would learn. And I would also teach him through repeating the task. One time I understood that my son was attached to Sprite, to soda. And when I used to pick him up from school, this one school that he used to be at, it was a 45-minute drive home, and he wouldn't get home until like 5 p.m. at night. And he was pretty young at the time, so he would be really hungry after school. So we would end up bringing him food in the car. And whenever I would bring him a Sprite, I knew that he was attached to this soda. So one time I brought him a soda, and he got into the car, he had the soda and he had the food. And when I saw the soda, I asked him, I said, hey, Bailan, can I have a sip of that? And he said, sure, here you go. And he gave me a sip, right? And then when I got the soda, I put it up to my lips. And when I put it up to my lips, I wasn't even really interested in drinking it. I was just interested to see if he was going to share his soda with me, to see if he was attached to it. So when I put it up to my lips, I hadn't even drank it yet. And he's like, oh my gosh, you're drinking so much. Why are you drinking so much soda? And I was like, he's like, leave some for me. And I was like, Bailan, I haven't even drank it yet. I just put it up to my lips. He's like, gosh, you're going to drink it all. I said you could have a sip. I didn't say you could drink the whole thing. And I was like, oh, wow, you're really attached to this Sprite, aren't you? I was like, you know what? I think I'm going to give it to your mom. And I kept it with me in the cup holder near where I was driving. I said, I think I'm going to give it to your mom. And he was so angry. He was so frustrated. He started turning red and he was yelling and hollering. And he was hollering so much. He was spitting. You could see the spit coming out of his mouth. He was so enraged that he didn't get this Sprite. And I was like, perfect. I found one of his cravings, right? So then, but ultimately, by the time we got home, he was nice and calm. And we sat down and we talked about it and we discussed it. And I helped him to be able to see that his mind was attached to the Sprite. He was holding on to it very tightly and he needed to learn how to share. And he understood and he agreed. And at the end of our conversation, he said, you're probably not going to get me another Sprite for a really long time, are you? Because he knows that you need to distance yourself from a certain craving, desire, attachment. And I said, you'll see. Right. So the very next day, after he had learned all this wisdom, right, because I was imparting this wisdom and I'd given him this mini lesson, I decided to now repeat it. Right. So the very next day when I picked him up from school, I had another Sprite waiting for him and some more food. And he opened the car door and he saw the Sprite and he looked at me and he saw the Sprite. He looked at me and it was like, oh, this is what we're doing. I was like, yeah, this is what we're doing. Come on, let's go. And he got in the car and I said, can I have a sip of your Sprite? And he said, sure, you can have a sip of my Sprite. And I said, how much can I drink? He said, as much as you would like. And I said, oh, okay, thank you so much. And I took a little sip and I handed it back to him. And then for many weeks and months after that, anytime we would go to a restaurant and he would order a Sprite, I would always ask him to drink the Sprite. Well, the reason why I did this is because once I had that little mini lesson with him and I imparted some wisdom, if I didn't get him another Sprite for like 3 months, he wouldn't have been able to apply the wisdom that I had taught him. But by teaching him the wisdom that evening, and then the very next day when I picked him up from school, he had an opportunity to apply that wisdom right away. Now it was more solidified in his mind. So you're going to need to impart wisdom. You're going to need to give them these little mini lessons, and then you're going to need to repeat it so they can apply that wisdom right there in the moment. If it was 2 weeks, 2 months, 2 years later that he got another Sprite, he wouldn't have been able to apply that wisdom that I had taught him that night before. So giving him the opportunity to apply the wisdom right away is going to help them to solidify it in their mind. As I mentioned at the beginning, use the Eightfold Path as a guide. That's what you would like to teach them. So my son, he understood the Eightfold Path and he was learning things like right speech. And when he would have conversations with his mom, sometimes they would be in her bedroom talking and I would walk into the room because I was interested to talk and they would maybe be in a little bit of an argument. And when I would walk in, I would kind of play a little game. I'd be like, hey, time out, guys, time out, time out, time out. Can I call time out here? And my son was like, all right. And then I was like, Bailan, do you remember those 5 factors of well-spoken speech? He'd say, yeah, a little bit. I was like, all right, what are those 5 factors? And he would go through them. Speaking at the proper time, what you say is true, gentle, beneficial, with a mind of loving kindness. And I would say, are you using all 5 of these factors right now talking to your mom? And he'd say, no. And I say, well, which ones are you missing? And he's like, I'm not speaking very gently. And I was like, okay, well, why don't you try to improve that? So now he would try to improve it while I was standing there. So you can use this Eightfold Path as your guide to be able to teach them, helping them to understand all those things like the 5 factors of well-spoken speech. So like where you see your daughters gossiping and slandering, it's helpful for you to teach them that because that's the natural law and then they can learn that kind of stuff. You would also like to teach them other things besides the Eightfold Path. They're going to need other things like life skills, like learning how to iron, learning how to cook, learning how to do laundry, learning how to clean. They're going to need all these things. I still remember when I was 9 years old, my mom was standing with me in front of an ironing board, and she was teaching me how to iron some clothes, a shirt. She said, here, you're not always going to have me around. You're going to need to learn how to do this. How about if I teach you how to iron a shirt? And I was like, oh, perfect. And she stood there and she taught me how to iron a shirt, right? My grandmother taught me how to bake a cake and bake brownies and cook and things like this. And different people in my life like that have taught me life skills. So you're going to need to teach your children life skills. It's not just the Eightfold Path. Sometimes as parents, we kind of take on the burden of doing all the household work. Here in Thailand, I've seen 2.5-year-old children washing dishes. I walked into my wife's sister's kitchen one time, and her little daughter was standing up on a stool at 2.5 years old, and her mom was teaching her how to wash dishes, right? So you can start them very early like this and teach them all these life skills because they're going to need that. It's important not to punish children, that you talk to them and you discuss things with them, but you're not punishing them. Oftentimes we grow up that way where we're being punished, and we think that that's what we need to do to our children. That doesn't mean that you don't maybe take things like their TV or their video games or things like this. You might need to do those kinds of things, but you're not trying to do it as a punishment. The way that I would do this is that I would say my son would lie. We would sit down and talk 1, 2, 3, 4 times about lying. And now after we've talked many times and he's understood the wisdom that it's unwise to lie, maybe on the 4th, 5th, or 6th time that we've talked about this, I'll say, we've talked about this 4 or 5 times and you're still lying. I think that if you lie again, we need to have some consequences here that you can see how important this is to no longer lie. And he's like, what are you talking about, Dad? And I said, well, I think that if you lie again, that maybe you need to lose your PlayStation for a period of time. He's like, oh, that's going to be very hard for me if I don't have my PlayStation, my video games. That's going to be very hard. And I said, I know. I think that during that time where you're not playing video games, it would be helpful for you to think about your lying so that you can improve your lying. And he's like, all right, Dad, I agree. I should lose my PlayStation. I say, okay, if you lie again, how long do you think you should lose your PlayStation? And he said, 1 day. And I said, that's not enough. I was like, you're going to need more time to think about this than just 1 day. And then he was like, okay, 3 weeks. And I was like, maybe that's too long, Bailan. Can you come up with something a little bit more in the middle? And he said, how about 5 days? And I was like, okay, that sounds good. So now he came up with it on his own. And he knows if he lies, this is going to happen. Right? And he's already decided this is going to happen. So I'm not punishing him. He's actually experiencing the consequences of his own decisions. He knows well in advance, if you lie again, this is what's going to happen. So then when he lied again, he understood already by himself that he was going to lose his PlayStation, right? So instead of punishing them and it coming from you out of anger and hostility, you have discussions with them, you guide them, you teach them 3, 4, 5, 6 times, but then eventually you're going to need to do things like this to raise it to their level of attention so that they can see how important it is to not lie. And during the time where he's not playing his video games, he needs to be thinking about, hey, this has happened because I was lying. And now it raises up more importance in his mind. It's important to reward good contact or good conduct. What you'll find is that you'll get much more success out of emphasizing the positive, emphasizing and highlighting the positive over the negative. If you're constantly telling your children the things that they're doing, quote unquote, wrong, then they're getting attention every time they do something wrong, and they're going to keep doing those things. But if you accentuate the positive, more and more they're going to be interested to do those things. So like when I saw my son doing certain things that were wise, I would say to him, wow, that's really wise. You did something really wonderful there. That's a great decision. That's a really wise decision. So if you emphasize the positive 95, 96, 98% of the time, you're only going to have to talk about the unwise things on a very limited basis, because each time you accentuate the positive, they're going to be more and more inclined to do those things. Don't assume that you know the full story with children, because there's times where my son would come home and he would tell me certain things that happened at school, and I would get his side of the story. But when I would talk to the teacher or I would talk to other people involved, like other children, I got a completely different story. right? You don't always know the full story. So sometimes parents, they hear from their child that something happened at school and they rush into the school and they start yelling and hollering at the teachers and the other children and the principal, and they end up damaging their relationships with all these people, creating unwholesome karma. Instead, whatever your children tell you, just understand that that's a portion of the story. And now there's other parts of the story that you need to be able to understand, and you need to go to talk to the teacher, talk to the other children involved. Don't ever assume that you know the full story. Ask more questions of other people. When you're teaching your children, location and position is important. What you'll find is that children, when they're sitting on the floor and the parent is sitting in a chair, they'll actually absorb the information better. It's not that parents are above their children or that children are above their parents. It's just there's something with the physical position of sitting that the child will actually internalize what it is that you're teaching them better. Whereas if you're sitting on the same level, the child doesn't tend to take it as significant. So one of the things that we used to do when my son was very little is if there was something very important to talk about, he would come and sit on the floor in front of me, and I would sit on the sofa. And then when I was talking to him, he would internalize it more. He would listen more. He would understand what I was communicating better. So if you have your children sit on the floor while you're talking to them about something important, then they'll tend to learn it and take it more seriously. And now my son knows, actually, there's certain times where there's big conversations that need to happen. I will say, Bailan, Dad needs to talk to you about something very serious. And he will come over and he will actually sit on the floor. And then he knows that this is where he would like to sit because he did this ever since he was growing up as a child. And he knows that this is a serious conversation and he's choosing to sit on the floor. So this location is really important. But again, make sure you understand that you're not above your children and your children aren't above you. Everybody's equal, but this positioning was really helpful to impart understanding with your child. Sometimes parents try to be their child's best friend. You might hear this. It's important to understand that there's a difference between a friend and a parent. And I don't suggest you relinquish the role of being a parent so easily. Sometimes parents really want to be their child's best friend. Friends and parents do things very differently. And if you relinquish that role of being a parent and give it up in order to be this best friend of your child's not going to consider you to be their parent. They're going to be looking at you as more and more of a friend. And they're not going to heed the advice of a friend in the same way that they would a parent. So I don't suggest you try to be their best friend, but instead you can be friendly with your child without trying to assume that role of being their best friend. They're going to need friends, and friends function very differently, and they have a different role in your child's life than a parent. So while you can be friendly with your child, I don't suggest that you try to be their best friend. Let them have friends. They need friends, and their friends are going to serve a certain role in their life. You be the parent, and don't be so ready to relinquish that role. Ensure that your child understands what is true love. Children don't typically understand this. There was a time where I was driving down the street and my son just started talking and he said, "Dad, I don't think Mom loves me." And I said, "Really?" I said, because I know his mom loves him, of course, right? He said, "I don't think Mom loves me." I was like, "Really? Why is that?" He's like, "I don't know. I just don't think she loves me." And I was like, "Really? Well, what is love to you? What does love mean to you?" And he started talking, and he was like, "Well, if Mom loved me, she would do this and she would do that and she would do this and she would do that." And he was like listed all these things, like she doesn't buy me this and she doesn't buy me that and she won't give me this and she won't give me that. And I was like, "Oh, you think that's what love is? That if Mom buys you all the toys that you want, that means that she loves you, but if she doesn't buy you toys, then she doesn't love you?" And he's like, "Yeah, she would give me all the toys that I want if she loves me." And I was like, "That's not love." And so I had to teach him what is love. And I had to explain this to him and help him to understand it. And then after our conversation, I started checking to confirm whether or not he understood what I had taught him. And then I started asking him questions. I said, "If somebody loved you, would they do this? If somebody loved you, would they do that? If somebody loved you, would they do this?" And he was like, "Yeah, they would do that." And I was like, "Oh, that's all the stuff that your mom does." And I was like, so do you think your mom loves you? And he was like, yeah, actually, I can see she does love me now. So it took us a while. We talked for several minutes in that conversation, but he needed to understand what is love because he didn't understand that. So you're going to need to teach them that lesson on true love that I taught you guys the other day. And then you can communicate love through speech, but remember your actions communicate much more loudly than your speech. Sometimes people go around and say to people through their speech, I love you, 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 but their actions don't say that. So remember, you're communicating just as much through your actions, if not more, than through your speech. So be sure that your actions match your speech and that you're demonstrating love through your actions, not just through your speech. If you have multiple children, you would like to treat all your children equally, where you're not treating one child one way and disciplining that child in one way, teaching the other one another way. You would like to treat them all equally and the same. Just like we were talking yesterday, quality of time is more important than the quantity of time. So sometimes parents don't have much time, especially early in the child's life. Maybe you're busy in your career, in your profession, making money and things like this. You might not have very much time to spend, but when you do spend time with your child, make sure it's quality time. If there's a situation where there's shared custody, because sometimes I have students that have that situation where maybe they've been in a relationship, now they're divorced, and they're shared custody. And the person who's learning with me, they're teaching their children the teachings of the Buddha. But then when their children go see the other parent, that parent's not teaching them and guiding them based on the teachings of the Buddha. When your children come back to live with you again, whether it's after a summer break or even just a weekend, understand your children are going to regress. That if you're teaching them all these good, wholesome teachings, and then they go spend time with this other parent who's not teaching them that stuff, when they come back, they are going to have regressed. So don't expect that they're going to be in exactly the same spot when they come back from the other parent's house. Your children can be influenced by others. Like when they go to school, they can easily be influenced by other people, whether it's the teachers or even other students, their friends. Sometimes my son, when he would go to school, this one particular school that he was at, there was some children that had a lot of ego. And I noticed whenever my son would come home on Monday morning or Monday afternoon, he'd have a lot of ego. On Saturday and Sunday, during the weekend, he didn't have ego. He was hanging out with me. But then when he would go to school and he would spend time with these friends, when he would come home, he'd have all this ego. And he was picking it up from the teachers. He was picking it up from the children. So I needed to help him to see that just because other people are practicing certain aspects of their life doesn't mean he has to adopt those same things. So understand your children can be influenced by others, and you're going to have to teach them to not just conform to what other people are doing, but have wisdom for themselves to know what is wise and unwise, and not allowing their mind to just conform to what other people are doing. Understand the difference between excitement versus enjoyment. Excitement is those conditioned feelings that you can only enjoy something if you're excited and having those conditioned feelings. That's the conditioned pleasant feelings. But you're going to need to learn for yourself how to enjoy something without conditioned pleasant feelings so that you can teach your children the same thing. And then lastly, children function through a praise and reward system. Just like animals, we are not animals, we are human beings, but our consciousness functions very similarly. This is why, like when we go to school, we get a high school diploma and we feel really great about that. And then we want to get maybe a college degree. And now we get a college degree and we want another one and another one, right? There's this praise and reward type thing that's kind of built in to the way that human beings function. So your children function the same way. They are looking for praise and reward. And you need to be careful about how much of this that you do, because if you overpraise your children, there can be a lot of ego. But if you're never telling your child that they're doing a good job, they're not hearing those words, they're not going to necessarily have the motivation to continue to do those wise things. So you need to come to the middle where you do praise them and reward them for certain things, but you do that in moderation. There are times when my son would ask me things like, hey, Dad, can I get a bag of Doritos from 7-Eleven? And of course, you're going to buy your child food anyway, but this is like maybe like a special thing, like a bag of Doritos. And I would pause for a minute and I would say, I don't know. Let me think for a second, son. Let me think. Are your grades good? Have you been talking to mom nicely? Have you been cleaning up around the house? Yeah, you've been doing all those things. Sure, you can get your bag of Doritos. Well, I was going to buy him the bag of Doritos anyway. I'm just getting some extra mileage out of this, and I'm connecting the purchase of the bag of Doritos to some conduct and some decisions that he's making. So that way he can see like, wow, dad's buying me Doritos because I'm doing these other things. So maybe I'll keep doing those things. So this is one of the ways you can kind of get some extra mileage out of that chocolate bar or that ice cream. They're like, hey, mommy, daddy, can I buy ice cream? Let me think for a second. You know, you've been getting really good grades lately, and I noticed you've been keeping your room nice and clean. Sure, you can get that ice cream. You probably would have bought it for him anyway, but just take like 10 seconds to get some extra mileage out of that ice cream where they can see that you're connecting it to decisions that they're making. Okay, so any questions on any of this stuff? No questions? Okay. So it's actually just a couple of minutes after 11. What I think we should do here is take a break. Sometimes this conversation takes us all the way up to lunch. And then there's a topic after lunch, but I think we can take a little break here, like a 15-minute break. We can come back at 11:20 and I can cover the afternoon session right after break and we can be done by lunchtime. Does that sound good for you guys? Okay. So enjoy your break and I'll see you guys in 15 minutes. Okay. Thank you guys. Mm-hmm.